The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I know a few people are trickling in, but we're going to go ahead and get started with the presentation. I am Mandy Sheriff, the Alumni Relations Manager at AFS-USA. Thank you for joining us this evening on our webinar, which is focusing on leveraging your AFS experience in interviews with Pamela Berland-X. We are pleased to have Pam here with us today, presenting the third of four webinars for us in our professional development series. Pam is an AFS returnee, U.S. to Brazil, 1975 to 76, and a coach and trainer with over 25 years of experience developing leaders to succeed in the international workplace. She has worked with more than 2,500 clients in 35 countries in the fields of government, multinational corporations, military, nonprofits, and universities. She's currently working with the Department of State's Career Services Department, where she advises foreign service officers and their families. Before we get started, I just wanted to share that Pam will be presenting one more webinar on June 5th, which will cover how to leverage your AFS experience on college application essays, updated for the new college application essay questions. We'll send the details of that following this webinar, and I hope you'll join us then. And a quick logistical note, feel free to type in your questions as you have them during the webinar. Pam will answer questions throughout the presentation. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to be unmuted to ask your question. And we will have time for Q&A at the end as well. So Pam, once again, we're grateful to have you here, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Mandy. Good evening or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. I'm very happy to be doing this. AFS is near and dear to my heart and definitely has given me so many opportunities and experiences throughout my life that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So this series of webinars is my way of giving back to the AFS community and sharing some tips with you, the more newly minted returnees and alumni, to capitalize on your AFS experience. If you would please type in to the chat box your first name, where you're calling from, and what country you went to on AFS. I, by some technological glitch, can't see it, but Mandy will read to me what you write. Also, as Mandy said, throughout the session, please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions, and also write in whatever questions or queries you have. This is meant to be interactive. Even though we can't see each other, let's try to make it intimate. When you are interviewing for jobs, for internships, for volunteer work, your AFS experience is very valuable. And in fact, that may be one of the reasons why you got the interview in the first place. So congratulations. You are now preparing for a face-to-face or perhaps a phone or perhaps a Skype interview with an organization of your choice. And once you have the interview, the basic assumption is that you can do the job. They have looked at your resume, they've seen that you have the qualifications, but now they want to see if you're a good fit for their organization. Do they want to sit next to you in a cube for 8-9 hours a day? Would they want to spend 17 hours with you on an airplane when you're going to Turkey for a workshop? And they're also looking for you to tell stories, to bring your resume to life. Research says that interviewers may make a hiring decision in as little as 3 to 5 minutes. So how can you get off on a good foot so that the interviewer, which may be the hiring manager, it may be your partner, it may be human resources, gets a positive first impression and decides, yes, we want you and we cannot do without you. So my presentation today is filled with tips on how you can make the most of this opportunity through preparation and practice. So, Mandy, before I continue, do we have people that typed in where they're from?
Yeah, we have a few, but you can feel free to type in if you haven't yet. We have Brittany from the USA, went to Japan. We have Tara from California, who went to Belgium. We have Enrico from North Carolina, who went to Japan. And Grace from Vermont, that went to Australia. That's who's typed in so far, but I know there are a few more of you on the line.
All right, please do. It helps me to have some mental image of your experience. All right, so I tried to make this, as I said, very practical, very hands-on. So here are the 6 P's of interviewing. Plan what you're going to say and how you're going to get there, and prepare what stories you want to tell. Practice it either alone in front of the mirror or with a partner. Picture yourself being successful and confident. Present your stories in the actual interview, and then hopefully progress to the actual job. So we'll go through each one of these with a little bit more detail. When you plan, think first about the big picture. The most important thing is how to get there and how much time do you need. I live in Washington, D.C., and traffic here is terrible if I need to drive. The metro sometimes experiences delays. The streets in certain parts of the city are like a spaghetti bowl. So if it's a really important interview, if I have to be there at 8 in the morning, if I'm unsure what it's like, I may even drive it in a practice run several days before. Increasingly, security is an issue, so you may need to pass through a gate, you may need to show an ID, you may not be able to bring in your laptop or your phone. It just depends. So try to ask these questions in advance. What are the security procedures for getting through? What ID should I bring? What entrance to the corporate park should I take? Where should I park my car? Dress code is also variable according to the organization. The trend, of course, is everything is much more casual, but it's okay to ask. Should I dress in a suit or formal attire, or can I be more comfortable? And they will certainly tell you. Obviously, have good grooming that is consistent with what the norms are of the organization you're working with. If you're going to do an internship in an international law firm, it's likely that there are not a lot of 5 o'clock shadows or stubbles. You're either clean shaven or you have a beard, but nothing in between. Always better to be more formal than informal, because you can always take off a jacket or loosen a tie, but if you come in jeans and everyone is dressed a few steps up, there's nothing you can do at that point. Also, always bring your resume, even though they have it. It's good to have an extra copy. If you have business cards from a current job or internship, or you can make your own. There are so many websites online where you can pick a template, fill in the information, pick your color, press submit, and in a few days you have a box of 100 or 200 business cards right at your doorstep. So I highly recommend this. Even if you don't have a company that you're working for, you can put on your business card what your skills are, and language skills if you have any, or and also, of course, you would include your email and your phone number. Addresses have kind of disappeared from business cards because people are so much more accessible by phone and email, and it's also a security measure. If you are a graphic designer, for example, or an inventor, or you are a writer, you might want to bring samples of your work that you could show. The next step, the next P, is prepare to ask questions. Excuse me, prepare to answer questions. The interviewer will often start with, tell me about yourself. And this is not an opportunity for you to tell your life story since you were 5 years old. This is also not an opportunity for you to reiterate what's on your resume, because they've already read it and they've already determined that what you have done in the past qualifies you for this job. So tell them something different. Make a link between what you've done before and what you would be doing in this job. Tell a story that illustrates a particular skill or area of knowledge that you have that's relevant to the job at hand. These other questions are some common ones that you might get from an interviewer. What makes you unique? And of course, the whole purpose of this webinar is to focus on your international experience. So whether you were gone for a summer, a semester, or a year, whether AFS was your first and only experience or whether it was only one of several, think about what did you learn in your international experience. Think about when you worked on multicultural or multinational or multilingual teams, because that very much is a part of today's workforce. Are you willing to travel and relocate? And for many young professionals, that's an eager yes. In fact, that's probably why you applied for the job. But sometimes when you buy a house and have a mortgage, or you have children that are in school, or you're taking care of a parent or a sibling, sometimes you're not able to have that much freedom. This question about is your German or whatever language good enough to conduct business in, this is a really critical question. I have always recommended that people put their language skills on their resume because it is attractive to recruiters. But I also recommend that you be very honest in your assessment of your language skills. So, for example, I was working with a recent university graduate who was, I believe, a Spanish minor, and she had spent a semester in Argentina. And she had on her resume fluent in Spanish. And I said to her, are you fluent in Spanish? And she said, well, you know, I can carry on a conversation. And I said, could you write a presentation to a professional group of people? Well, if I worked really hard on it and I got some help, I could probably write it. I said, could you write a report in Spanish that would be presented to a professional group of people? Well, it would probably take me a little bit longer, and, you know, I can, you know, do spell check in Spanish, and, you know, I might have to look up some verb conjugations. And I said, Jessica, I'm really glad that you value the Spanish that you have and that you took to studying it in school and spent time abroad, but you're not fluent. If I, as the hiring manager, see fluent on your resume, what that means is not necessarily perfection, but that you could conduct a meeting and write a basic report in that language. And if I found out that you misled me about your language fluency, then I would be quite upset and perhaps rescind my offer for a job. So LinkedIn, if you have a profile on LinkedIn, has a section for languages. And on that, in that section, there are a variety of levels that you can choose, which says native-like fluency, professional fluency, conversational ability, basic proficiency. So look at those levels, and perhaps one of those would be better to describe your level of language. Another question they might ask, especially if you're going to be working on an international team, you're going to be traveling, you'll be working with people from different backgrounds, they might ask you, give me an example of how cultural differences created problems in carrying out a task. So the whole idea is that you have some concrete stories to tell about what your international and intercultural experience taught you. Also prepare to ask some questions. Very often at the end of an interview, the interviewer will say, well, do you have any questions for us? And here's an example of some typical questions that you might ask. And again, if this is a job that has an international or intercultural focus, make sure that some of your questions revolve around that as well. The last question, what is the career path you have taken here, is a really good way to engage the interviewer. During the whole interview, you've been talking mostly about you. So that question encourages the interviewer to talk about him or herself a little bit, and they might reveal one of their secrets or one of their strategies for getting a job in the international arena. Here is an example of a personal story, or what I might use as an introduction to tell me about yourself. I would say, in high school, I had the opportunity to study in Brazil for a year as an AFS exchange student. This amazing experience determined my studies in Latin American studies and international business, my fluency in Portuguese, my passion for travel and collecting handicrafts, and many lifelong friendships with people of different cultural backgrounds. So right away, I tell them I have personal international experience and how that has benefited me in my personal life. So not too long, not too boring, but hopefully interesting enough to catch their attention. Now, when they're asking, give me an example of your work, I often recommend using a model that I call SARL, S-A-R-L, which of course you can see stands for situation, actions, results, and the link to the desired job. So here's a story that could come from an average AFSer. He or she was in a classmate with all Chinese students, and they all had questions about the US, and I felt constantly criticized. So imagine you're telling a story like this. So the actions I took were to really become better informed about US politics, because I had to explain and sometimes defend the decisions of the US. I shared information without sounding defensive, in a conversational tone. I also had to learn more about Chinese politics so I could take a more balanced view of our conversation and to be able to make comparisons. So as a result, my classmates became more open to me, and we were able to have productive and friendly conversations rather than just criticisms. And I found ways that we could learn from each other. So how this is relevant, excuse me, how this is relevant to the job I'm applying for is that it's an example of how I reach out across cultures. I seek to ask questions, I seek to learn more about the topics, and it's always in function of building strong relationships with our partners or our clients or our colleagues who are overseas. So situation, action, results, and link to the desired job. I'll tell you an aside. Mandy mentioned that I work with diplomats in the State Department here in Washington, and there was a hiring freeze that was recently lifted. So now my services as a career counselor are highly in demand because now there's some movement in the marketplace, so to speak. And I have taught this SARL technique to many of my clients who are preparing their interviews for an actual situation. And several of them have come back to me and said that they received compliments from the interviewer for telling the story in such a focused and concise way, and actually linked it back to the job for which they were applying, and not just telling them a story that was unrelated, but interesting. So keep this in mind as a quick strategy that you could employ when you are interviewing. So here's another example. This one is my story. I often work with individuals or couples who are going on an overseas assignment. So they may work for a large multinational company in the US, and now they are going over to the subsidiary in another country. I recently was working with a couple going to the Netherlands, and while I had toured there many years ago, I was not an expert on that country. I'm a Latin American expert because of my experience in Brazil and a lot of work in Mexico. So the action I took was to find a partner. I would handle the part in the training about the moving logistics and the cultural transition in general. And she, who was a Dutch woman living in the Netherlands, who had actually spent some time in the US, talked about the Dutch specific information. So what it was like living in the various neighborhoods in Amsterdam. Should you drive or should you take public transportation? What were the schools like for their children? How easy would it be to find clothing for the woman who was rather short? And a lot of Dutch are rather tall. So we were really a good partnership, and we complemented each other well. And we planned in advance of the actual training session so that we each had our areas of responsibility. The result was that the couple was very pleased with the training and told us specifically that they learned a lot of valuable tips and insight, and they felt more prepared, and now they are ready to go, and some of their anxieties diminished because they were empowered with information. How this would help me in a job working with couples who were going to countries that I did not have experience for, I would basically follow the same model. I'll do research in the background, I'll find a partner, I'll delineate areas of responsibility and prepare, and then deliver to hopefully very, very satisfied customers. So again, very simple model, a way to structure and focus your story. Here are some other examples of the kinds of statements that you would be able to make in an interview, whether the interviewer asked specifically, tell me about your international experience and how it would help you do the job, or whether you want to slip these kinds of comments in because they add color to your story. So I just pulled a variety of countries. Of course, I did check to make sure these were countries that were participants in AFS. And, you know, in France, I was the foreigner rather than being in my own country and dealing with foreign nationals that had come to visit. And so I found it was important to invite all voices to the conversation. India, which is a country of incredible diversity and many, many places of harmony, although of course there's some strife there as well. But the lesson learned was, how can diversity promote harmony and a focus on commonalities? Third example is when you deal with the language barrier. So I'm guessing that those of you that are on the line that went to Japan, if you had had Japanese before you went, it was probably quite rudimentary. And then the Australians speak English. Of course, they have their own accent and slang. And the woman who went to Belgium, maybe you had French before, but you landed in Flanders where Flemish is spoken. So that would have been a whole new experience. So think about ways to give brief but concrete examples of how your language skills, your cultural understanding, reaching across borders, improvising, enabled you to successfully make connections with people and develop friendships and even collaborations. So I'm going to stop just for a minute and ask if anybody would like to take a stab at creating a sentence like these here from their own experience. Do we have any volunteers? If you raise your hand, Mandy can unmute you.
See, I'm looking. No hands yet.
Be brave, people. This is an opportunity. We can't see your face. Give it a try. We can give you lots of support. I can give you some specific feedback on what you did well and perhaps even how to make it stronger. Any takers?
Oh, I have one, Enrico.
Okay.
Great. I will unmute you. Okay. Enrico, it says that you're self-muted, so I think you need to unmute yourself. Ah, there you go.
Oh, okay. So in Japan, in class, I couldn't make a lot of friends, even towards the end. But towards the end, I decided to advance and try. Instead of just staying with a single group, I tried going to every group, and so I finally found some friends at the end because I diversified and talked to other people that I wouldn't have talked to before.
That's a great example. And I imagine that it took some courage to do that.
Yeah.
So if you were interviewing for a job that had the potential to give you an international assignment sometime in the future, how would you talk about that experience as one of the ways you would approach building relationships on your overseas assignment?
So I would say, like make up a sentence?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
A sentence or even a couple, because we're having a conversation and, I want to know how that experience would make you a better candidate in comparison to someone that had never been overseas.
Okay. So I would say that during my time in Japan, I had a hard time making friends in class. So because I stayed with the singular group of boys, after I learned that I couldn't make friends with them, I decided to diversify and talk to a lot of other groups in my class, and then I started to make friends with people that I didn't think I would have made friends before.
Mm-hmm. And how would those skills of reaching out to other people be valuable in the workplace?
Well, having courage of trying and talking to other people with different cultures and different beliefs and things like that.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So how did that feel, telling that story?
Like, what do you mean?
Like, did it bring back memories of that experience?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what impression do you think that story would make on me, the interviewer, about your ability to maybe take some risks and have an idea that relationship building was important?
Yeah, I think it would leave a good impression because of that.
Mm-hmm. You're right. You're right. And so this is the point of this whole webinar, is that you come back from your AFS experience with skills and experiences that your competitors for these jobs don't have. So always remember that story and what you learned from it. But also remember, if we go back to the SARL method, don't forget the L, linking it back to the desired job. So here's your story. And, you know, the risk I took, the willingness that I was able to reach out to other people is an example of what I would do on this job. Or I've been tested and tried, or I've learned some new skills in building relationships, and I would continue to do that in my new role.
Okay, I see.
So you see how, don't just tell me a story in isolation where I say, oh, that's nice, but link it back to the job that you're applying for. And now I, as the interviewer, not only say, oh, that's nice, but I say, oh, here's somebody that would be unafraid or less afraid to really reach out to people that he didn't know and start building relationships from scratch. And that's a really important characteristic for people who want to do business internationally. You have to get out of your comfort zone and connect with people. So that was a great story, Enrico. Thank you for sharing it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Does anybody else have a story now that we have our one brave person who went first?
Yeah, we have one more. Let's see, from Brittany.
Hi, Brittany.
Brittany, could you try to unmute yourself? There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi.
Hi, Brittany. Welcome.
Thank you.
What's your story?
Okay. So the story I wanted to share was that when I was in Japan and I was like settling in with my host family, you know, I felt really like isolated, a little bit like not part of the family. And it wasn't until like later in my you know, exchange that I realized that, you know, it wasn't them that was like that were isolating me. It was myself, you know, trying to just constantly comparing them, you know, a whole different culture from mine, and, you know, comparing them to my own family. And so after I realized that, I stopped thinking about my own family and just started thinking about how, you know, Japanese culture is really different and how they are going to be different, and I have to accept them and look at the way that they're looking at me. So I feel like towards the end, when I realized this, that I got really close with my host siblings and my host mom and my host dad, and I felt like a really good connection with them because I started looking at things in a different perspective, in their perspective, and adapting and interacting with them in the way that, you know, Japanese people would interact with each other.
That is an amazing story. That's an amazing story, and very true. So if you were telling me that story in an interview, what would be the link that you would want to make to me, the interviewer, and to the job that I might offer you? So what were the lessons learned from that experience that you think would make you an excellent employee?
Well, I think it would be, the lesson I learned, I think, is that you have to learn to, you know, if there's a problem that might arise during like a job or a task I have to do, I have to be able to, you know how to do it in multiple ways and find a solution and think about, you know, what the other person might might expect from me as a employee.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So if I were to try to put that in like really more formal terms, I might say a couple of things. One is that you learned to see things from another perspective. You know, not
Yeah.
just, oh, this is, you know, my idea of a family is what a family should be, turned into, oh, the Japanese have a different view of family, and let me learn about that.
Yeah.
So you're willing to see things from another perspective, which is really, really critical. And the second thing that I would say is that you were willing to make yourself vulnerable, and be open with people and try new ways of relating to people. And in the end, it made you closer with your family, something that maybe at the beginning you didn't think would ever happen.
Yes.
So if I'm thinking of you as a candidate for a job, then I would say, well, Brittany is not going to come in just with fixed ideas that it has to be done her way. She would be willing to ask people, well, what do you think? And how do you do it in your country? And when you get more voices, you get more diversity of opinion, you get more diversity of experience, the end product is always better. Research has shown that debate and diverse opinions often produce a better result. And the fact that you were willing to change your attitude and reach across the divide, so to speak, shows that you're a person who's open to change and open to hearing and trying different perspectives. And I would always want somebody like that on my team, rather than somebody that was very fixed in their ways. So how did that feel telling this story?
I felt a little like I'm telling something personal about myself, since it was a very personal experience and, you know, personal experience, like feelings. But I think it would, you know, impact the interviewer and make them view me as a valuable employee.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I'm not hiring a robot. You know, the fact that you shared a little bit about your personal side, you were very genuine in that story, made me see the kind of person that you are. People often think that they have to be, quote unquote, professional in an interview. And sometimes their definition of professional is very serious and very solemn, and don't smile and don't crack jokes, look like you're going to work 16 hours a day and not fool around ever or take lunch. And that's not how it operates. People want to work with people that are nice and pleasant and fun to be around. So the fact that you showed me that bit of your personality, and you were reflective about it, gave me a very positive feeling towards you. So you have the job, Brittany. And Enrico, too. You have the job. I'm going to hire both of you. All right. Do we have anyone else? You're welcome. You're welcome. Starting salary, $50 million. Anybody else want to share their story and get some feedback, perhaps?
We do have one more.
Okay.
Let's see. Tara. Tara, you are unmuted now.
All right, awesome. Thank you. So I spent my year abroad in Belgium during the 2016 presidential election. And so for me, that experience was very interesting because I was sort of seen to all of my peers in Belgium and everyone I interacted with as like the one representative they had of the United States. So I had to struggle to balance conveying my own perspective on the election, but also like trying to be really reflective of all of the United States and understand the different views. So I put a lot of effort into like trying to understand viewpoints that were different from my own. And so I think that that would really help me engage with people who have different perspectives and experiences than I had, and try and like come to an understanding that's holistic.
That's a great example. Very, very true. Very, very true. Did you feel at times that people were stereotyping you as an American, and whatever American meant to that person, that's what you were?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so how did you deal with that?
I tried to like, there were two ways that people would really stereotype me. Either they would sort of laugh at me and sort of be like, what's going on with Trump? Because I was in Europe, and so that's a pretty liberal place. So I would say pretty much everyone I interacted with was very opposed to him. And they would sort of just be like, what's wrong with America? And I would sort of have to be like, you understand this is not how all of us feel. Like, it is a diverse and divisive issue. And I would try and have to be like, I don't necessarily feel this way, but I think that it's important to understand how this side of the country feels, this part of the country feels, that other people would just sort of assume right away that I didn't agree. And so then I had to be like, well, you know, some people think this way, and it's important to understand why half our country voted for it. So it was an interesting, like, I didn't want to be too negative towards either perspective. So I had to really be like very polite in however I responded to whichever thing people assumed about me.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, what a time to be abroad, right?
Yeah.
You know, you learned by fire. So I think that also is a very powerful story. And as the interviewer, I heard a couple of things that I would like to share back with you that I think you could use in an interview. Number one is you were a target or a victim, should we say, of stereotyping. And you know, most people will say, oh, I don't stereotype, or I'm not biased, or I'm not prejudiced, when indeed they are. Even the most liberal person who has a great diversity of friends has certain biases and preconceived notions. And so sometimes being the target of a stereotype can help us understand what happens when we ourselves put a stereotype on someone else. So again, that empathy of, you know, being in the target's shoes, I would say is one lesson. And the second lesson is that you learned to do your research and to be informed and try to deliver a balanced approach when probably the stereotyping daggers were forcing you in one direction. And you tried to swim against the tide, so to speak, and present the other side as well. So that also is a very desirable trait where you don't immediately make a decision favoring one side. You're willing to be open and have discussions about a diverse range of perspectives or positions. And that also is a characteristic that would be desirable in someone who's working in a multicultural, multinational team. So thank you for sharing that story. That was a good one.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So we had 3 people that shared their stories, and they were all really great examples and really relevant. And what I hope that all of you take away from that is a couple of things. Number one is how to tell a story. And the second thing is to link it back to the desired job. A job interview really isn't all about you. It's about the interviewer making a decision about you. So any way that you can touch the interviewer, any way that you can convince her to see things through your eyes, any way that you can persuade him that your experience is relevant and indeed better, more comprehensive, more diverse, more nuanced than your competitors, that will help you get the job. Excuse me. So once again, thank you. Let's go on to some of these other slides. So we did highlight the international. So the next P in our framework is practice. I hope that you will write down the SARL, S-A-R-L stories, so that you have some bullet points for each of the segments. But if any of you have ever given presentations in class, you will know that what you write is a very different animal than what you speak. So I always recommend writing down your story, but then practicing it out loud. Every time I do a presentation, and I do a lot of training and a lot of workshop and a lot of presentation, I make up my PowerPoint, and in my head it's all perfectly sequenced and the timing is good and the vocabulary is appropriate. And then I practice it out loud. Yes, indeed, I stand in a room by myself and I talk to the wall, but I always, always, always end up making substantial changes to the presentation in both sequence, amount of information I share, examples, tone of voice, and particularly timing. So in summary, practice it out loud, either by yourself or even better with a partner who can give you some feedback. Don't forget to add the link it to the desired job. Don't just leave me hanging with that story, because I, as the interviewer, would ask you, so what? Why is that story important? If by chance you're going to be interviewing in a second language, that is, you're fluent enough or, to at least do a part of the interview in another language, practice, practice, practice before the actual interview, whether you practice speaking as well as practice listening. So find some YouTube videos, talk to a friend in that language. If there is a TV or radio station that you can connect to using that language, just to get you back up to speed. I do training in Portuguese, and my Portuguese is pretty good even after many, many years, but I get a little rusty. So before I go to deliver a training program in Portuguese or have a program over the phone in Portuguese, I always follow this advice. I speak to myself, I talk to my friends, I listen to music, and I get back into my Portuguese head. The next P in the sequence is picture, positive mental attitude. I read a study once that said the physical reaction you have to nervousness and excitement is the same. So your heart races and you might get a little sweaty and you feel a little anxious, but can you channel that into positive energy rather than anxiety? Remember how you felt in a past successful experience and try to channel that energy and that focus and that sense of triumph. On the other hand, you might also want to think about, well, what are some things that could go wrong and how might I circumvent them, or how might I diminish their importance? So let's say you wanted to use a couple words in a foreign language during your story, but one of those words is really complicated and you sometimes forget it. Write it down. It's okay to bring some notes into an interview with you. So prepare for the best and prepare for things that might not go well and how you can diminish that. Present. You're there. Today's the day. Always allow enough time to get there, because you never know what delays you will encounter in traffic, on public transportation, and you don't want to be late. Make sure that you have a phone number of a contact person. So in the event that you are delayed for some reason, you can always advise them where you are and how late you think you might be. Picture yourself being successful. Wear something that makes you feel good. Do you have a lucky pair of socks, gentlemen? Ladies, do you have a special pair of earrings that always make you feel happy? Do you want to put a picture of your dog in your briefcase because she always makes you smile when you look at her? Whatever it takes to start generating that positive energy. Body language is something that people worry about very much. And my response, after having videotaped a lot of people, excuse me, videotaped a lot of people doing practice interviews, is that 99% of the people have normal, natural body language. They move their hands when they're speaking. They look mostly at the person that they're talking with, but they may look around as they're trying to remember that word that they should have written down on a little piece of paper. Try to match or mirror the energy of the interviewer. So if the interviewer is really laid back and kind of calm, then you try to maintain a similar attitude. If the interviewer is really energetic and kind of sitting forward and laughing, and there's a lot of kind of hand gestures, try to capitalize on that energy as well. People like to connect with people who are like them. I'm not saying if they scratch their left ear, you should scratch your left ear or their left ear. That's not what I mean. But try to match them in energy and tone. And obviously, you're going to thank the interviewer with a follow-up. An email is fine. A handwritten note is also appreciated. One thing that I will tell you is a pet peeve of mine, and I admit that this is my weakness, is I often observe women flipping their hair. You know, they'll be playing with their hair in an interview. And this is not behavior that is appropriate to an interview. It's behavior that's normal when you're out with your friends, but don't play with your hair. You know, if you're prone to do it, then tie it back in a ponytail or with a clip or something so that you're unlikely to play with it. That's my pet peeve of the day. And I hope that none of you women or men with long hair do that, but try to eliminate that from your behavior. A lot of people ask me about salary discussion. When should we talk about salary? And my advice, and the advice of all career coaches, is always try to delay the discussion of salary for as long as possible. And don't be precise, give a range. So let's say you know that a job is going to kind of range, it pays about $70,000. And let's say that that is something similar to what you would like. So give a range. Say, you know, I'm interested, or my goal, or based on my research, I know these kinds of positions at similar companies in the city will pay a range from, let's say, $65,000 to $95,000, and that range is comfortable for me. Try to do some research. There's a lot of stuff online. There's salary.com and glassdoor.com, and then you could just Google what the position is in your city, and sometimes it'll come up with a range. Salaries are very city dependent. So if you live in a major city like New York, Chicago, LA, Austin, Dallas, salaries are going to be higher than in smaller towns. If you have a specialty or some certification, like you're an engineer or you're a CPA, those jobs will usually pay you more than if you're a major in business but don't have a CPA, for example. If this is your dream job, you don't want salary to derail the discussion. And so always find a way to say, you know, here's a range, but I'm open to discussion. I'm sure that we could come to some kind of mutual agreement. You always want to keep the door open. And don't hesitate to ask for more if you think you deserve it. There's been a lot of studies lately that have come out that women are being offered and are being paid salaries that are less than men. I don't know that you would get an answer if you ask the question explicitly, are you paying women and men the same salary? But it's a way that you could try to ask around your friends that work in a similar industry, or do networking to try to find people that would give you information. And the last step is progress. Did you get the job, Well, of course you did, because you're so wonderfully prepared. And if so, congratulations. You may end up having a follow-up call or a follow-up interview to discuss a lot more of the details, the salary, the starting date, the benefits package like insurance and so on. If this interview was not successful, then you have the right to ask the interviewer for feedback and ask them both, what did you think I did well, and what made me a good candidate, and what were the things I didn't do well, and why did you ultimately decide not to hire me? Both pieces of feedback, both the positive and constructive, can be helpful to you. Many interviewers will take the time, if they care about professional development, they will take the time to give you that feedback, even if it's just very brief. There are many others that won't take the time, either because they're so busy or because they may be prohibited from sharing that information. Their company may have said, please have no more contact with the candidates once they have been eliminated from consideration. So don't take it personally if they don't get back to you. It is not personal. And again, follow up with a written or a phone thank you for that feedback if you did get some. That's always much appreciated. So we have just a couple minutes left, and I would like to know if any of you that are on the line have had successful interviewing experiences in the past, and if you have any tips that you would like to share with the rest of us so that we can gain from your experience.
You can raise your hand if you have anything you'd like to share. Let's see. I do have a question, but I'll hold off for anyone that wants to share their experiences.
I would say go ahead and ask your question. I'm sure we could all benefit from it.
Okay. So someone has asked, I know that it is technically illegal in some places for employers to ask what your current salary is, but what do I do if I'm asked in an interview, even if it's in, I'm assuming, even if it's in a state where you're not allowed to ask?
Mm-hmm. Right. So that's always the delicate question. I would try to give a range if you feel comfortable doing that. So you could say, you know, again, let's say you're an accountant, and you could say, in my understanding, people that have a CPA and that have 3 years of experience in a mid-sized firm, as I do, the salary range is X to Y, and I am in that range. There has been several articles in the press lately about companies not basing their offer on your current salary. And that in part is due to a systemic bias of paying women less. So even though two candidates may be equal, a male and a female, the female might get offered less because of her prior salary, and then she will never catch up because she will always be behind. And so many companies, the forward-looking ones, are saying, this is what we believe should be paid to the best candidate, regardless of what their prior salary is. And we are going to offer that salary as an incentive for them to join our organization. Other questions or tips or techniques that you would like to share?
Someone has asked, are there any tips or resources that you would recommend for finding international companies and organizations to apply to?
That's a great question. And they're, you know, in the old days, we used books and reference books in the library. So I know that there still are some books that are written about finding international careers. And so I would go on Amazon or Barnes and Noble because they're going to have the most updated ones. Your library may have several books, but they may be very old. Or even if they're only 5 or 10 years, you know, 5 or 6 years old. The research done for them was done a year or 2 or 3 before that, and then the book was written. So everything is outdated. So the internet is really going to be your best source. You're also going to be more successful if you are more targeted. So don't just look at what companies do business internationally, and I'm going to apply to all of them. Find companies that have a product or a service that you believe in. Find companies that have operations in countries where you would like to go or where you have an expertise. Find companies that have somebody in your network working for them. I just recently found a very interesting way to look at networking. And, you know, I know that many of you are recently back from your AFS experience. So you may still be in high school, you may still be in college, some of you may be recent college graduates. But a professional that's already worked for a couple of years might have 50 people total in his or her network. And if each of those people knows 50 people in their network, suddenly you've created a network of 2,500 people. Now, of course, you're not going to, excuse me, you're not going to connect with 2,500 people, but even 10% is 250. So that's a lot. So networking is a way to find really cool jobs that have an international component. If you have some language skills that you gained on your experience, I would say try to keep those up and try to improve them. I have gotten a fair amount of work speaking Portuguese. I also speak Spanish. It's not as good as my Portuguese, but there are also a lot of bilingual English-Spanish professionals, not so many English-Portuguese. And when I do work in Portuguese, I charge more than I do when I work in English because I'm bringing an additional skill to the table. And sometimes people protest, well, we're hiring your skill as a facilitator or as a trainer. It really doesn't matter what language you're in. And I say to them, do you have a car? And they usually say yes. And I say, do you have upholstered seats or do you have leather seats? And suddenly they recognize that the upholstery is standard and the leather is an upgrade, and you have to pay for the upgrade. So I'm not a standard trainer. I don't just come in English. I come in English and Portuguese, and you have to pay the upgrade. So getting back around to your question about, you know, companies and organizations, there are some that are very obvious, like Coca-Cola or McDonald's or Google or the United Nations or charities like the Red Cross and the Red Crescent that are all over. See if you can do some kind of volunteer work or internship with international organizations to continue to gain that international experience, even if it's just, you know, for a week or two or over the summer between school years. All of that counts and builds towards your international expertise. Any other questions or comments?
I don't see any.
All right, we have reached the top of the hour. So if any of you have a follow-up question, please feel free to email me. I've included my cell phone number too. I'm in Washington, D.C. If you're in California, just please don't call me at 9 p.m. because it'll be 1 a.m. in the morning, my time. But my hope is that I have given you some not only practical tips, which is always helpful, but also a mindset about always including your international and intercultural experience in how you present yourself in an interview, because it will always give you the advantage over someone that doesn't have that experience in a lot of ways for overcoming obstacles and dealing with people who are different and battling stereotypes and being open to different perspectives. So good luck to all of you as you go forward in your studies and in your careers, and I wish you all the very best of luck. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, everyone. I will follow up with the recording of the session, so if you have any questions to go back to and want to see some slides, I'll be sending that to you shortly. Thanks again. Thank you, Pam, and hope to see you on June 5th.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks.